Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. We're going to allow about 1 or 2 more minutes. We see a lot of people filling the virtual room. So if you guys could just stand by, we will be starting probably about 11:01 or 11:02. In the meantime, I have Daniel and Chris with us, and I'd like just to go ahead and maybe chat a little bit about, how their trip was to Ignite last week, and then we can go ahead and get started with the webinar.
Great, thank you, Jenny, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Cohen-Dumani. I attended a few days at Ignite, and we're joined here with Chris Petit, who, Chris, you spent the entire week in Orlando, right?
I did, yes. Withum was gracious enough to send me for the week, and so I got the chance to soak up sessions all week long. And I've been to 2 Ignites now, and this is my second, obviously, and by far this was the most exciting, and just the sheer amount of announcements was very interesting to watch throughout the week.
It is, and I believe Ignite was the conversion to a lot of previous conference. We had the SharePoint conference, the TechEd, the Link conference, Skype for Business, and Microsoft brought it all back into one conference starting 2 years ago, Ignite, right? And yes. It seems that they're bringing back a SharePoint conference next year. Is that right?
Yeah, Jeff Teeper, the CVP for the SharePoint OneDrive team, announced the SharePoint conference. I believe it's next May in Vegas. So what I expect is that the SharePoint many of the announcements that were made this week that will come in the near future, I imagine the SharePoint conference will be when they will bring them into general availability sometime next year in May.
Got it. Excellent.
Excellent. Okay, well, it is a couple minutes after. We still have people filling the room, but let's go ahead and get started. We have so much to cover. Today, we are going to be having a webinar on Microsoft Ignite, Debrief 2017, talking about the key takeaways. I'm Jenny Lynch. I'm Director of Marketing for Withum. And let me go into a tiny bit of housekeeping before we get started. This session is being recorded, and we will send out a link to everybody after the webinar a little later this afternoon. It'll be about 45 minutes, probably 50 minutes with all the content we have. We're going to have Q&A at the end, but please send in your questions during the webinar and during the presentation, and we'll get to them. And I think that's pretty much it with the housekeeping, and we're ready to go ahead and get started. Daniel, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Jenny, and welcome, everyone. My name is Daniel Cohen-Dumani. I am a partner and market leader at Withum, in charge of our Microsoft Service and Solution Group here. I've been involved in the digital transformation and the SharePoint world for over 16 years. Previously, I was a CEO with Portal Solutions, and our practice merged with Withum about 4 or 5 months ago now. So I have a lot of expertise around SharePoint. As a matter of fact, I started working with SharePoint when nobody can even spell the word back in 2001. So it's been a long journey for me. My interests are very much around productivity, the modern workplace, and Work 2.0. So Ignite was almost a homecoming for me. So we're also here joined with Chris. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Do you want to go ahead and share your screen? I don't see a screen share at the moment.
Oh, thank you. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
There we go.
All right, great. Yes, as Daniel mentioned, my name is Chris Petit. I have been at Withum now for going on 8 years, and I have been in the SharePoint space for close to 10 years now. And my particular interests are in user experience across 365 applications, from SharePoint, Delve, etc. And I have particular interest in business analysis and user experience research and design. And as you can see, my fun fact, I decided to jump out of a plane, but I can't bring myself to bungee jump, so maybe someday.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Agenda for today's session, we are really going to talk about Ignite, give you an overview, impression, and we're focusing on the modern workplace. Frankly, that modern workplace, which encompasses Office 365 and Microsoft 365 and something new like Bing for Business, was truly the focus of Ignite. There were announcements and news around other areas, but the focus was truly on Office 365. And then at the end, we'll give you a sense and help you chime in into what our next webinar should be. Quickly, a few words about Withum. We've been in business for over 16 years as a group here, previously known as Portal Solution. We merged our practice in May of 2017. We're focused on the modern workplace, Office 365, turnkey intranet solution, managed services, data analytics, enterprise mobility and security, business process automation, and recently we started getting involved with Dynamics 365 as well, and obviously Azure as an underlying platform. We've done tremendous amount of SharePoint and Office 365 implementation over the years. Our company has over 900 employees. We are part of a public accounting firm in the top 25 in the country. Our group is over 50 people now, scattered in the northeast of the United States. Fun fact about us, we've been selected and still part of a lot of Microsoft Office 365 and SharePoint early adopter programs. So while Ignite was a lot of news for all of you, we learned about this for us 3-4 months back, and obviously been working with Microsoft closely in shaping what the products are. So let's get started and jump in here. There were a lot of announcements. I think Chris and I were chatting earlier, and from our memory, there wasn't a conference that we've attended with so much news floating here and there. Some of those were things we were expecting, some were surprises, and we're going to distill that for all of you today. We'll talk about Microsoft 365. For those of you who does not know what it is, we'll explain. We actually did a webinar on Microsoft 365 a few weeks back. We'll focus a lot of the conversation today around Office 365 enhancement. We'll talk about Bing for Business and finish with artificial intelligence, which really was everywhere, right? Chris, any big takeaway for you from your week at Ignite?
Yeah, I think the big thing that we're going to talk about in very shortly is clarity about how to use these applications within 365, which has been a bit of a perennial problem in Microsoft's messaging. So I feel at the end of the conference, it was very clear to me Microsoft's vision for each of the applications in 365 and how they talk to each other.
Excellent. So let's start with a poll. We would like to know from the audience if you either attended Ignite in person or virtually. What was unique this year is all the sessions are available to be played, regardless if you were an Ignite attendee or not. We'll send the link when we send you all the recording, so you can attend all the session. We're going to give you a Reader's Digest version of it. We're condensing 1 week into an hour, but all of those sessions can be attended, replayed at your leisure. So let's give a few minutes for the poll here. Is it starting?
Yeah, it's been launched.
Okay. All right. So let's see if you guys are seeing the poll here.
Are you able to see the poll, Chris?
Yep, I see people in progress, yes. So excellent. So about 75% of the folks did not, 10% attend virtually. So, you know, we're going to hopefully give you not so much news for those of you who attended, but summarize a lot of what was talked about. All right, so let's jump in. Let's talk about something that really came up out of the keynote on Monday morning. Satya Nadella did a really good job in summarizing the momentum, right? So Office 365 obviously is having a lot of momentum. Microsoft, for the first time, really shared numbers. There's about over 300,000 organizations that have deployed SharePoint and OneDrive in Office 365, right? So that's a very large number of folks that are moving to the cloud. About 60% of all SharePoint seats that are deployed are now available online. That's a great advances on the SharePoint side. Microsoft has seen a growth of 90% from last year in more users active in Office 365. OneDrive has seen a lot of momentum about syncing. We knew that OneDrive was a big challenge around file syncing, and Microsoft fixed that about a year ago. So with the fix and new technology came a tremendous amount of growth of syncing. Obviously, Microsoft likes to tell us that they've been recognized in 6 Gartner Magic Quadrant and Forrester Waves around collaboration, communication, social, enterprise search. And the great news here is Microsoft Teams, which, if you all recall, was released earlier this year, is now being used by over 125,000 organizations worldwide. So great momentum here. Let's stop the poll here. We're having some technical difficulty here. There we go. All right, so hopefully you can all see the next slide. So let's jump in and talk about Microsoft 365. So Microsoft 365, what is it, right? So, you know, one thing that struck me during a lot of the keynotes is Microsoft presenter and speaker talk a lot about Microsoft 365. For instance, they were demonstrating a PowerPoint feature and said, hey, this is part of the Microsoft 365 suite, right? Why? I think Microsoft is more and more going to emphasize this rich platform called Microsoft 365, which is a complete, intelligent, secure solution to empower employees. Frankly, this is the combination of Office 365, Windows 10, Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, all bundled in one package, right? Now, you can buy those products separately. A lot of our clients, as a matter of fact, buy those products separately. But when Microsoft talks about Office 365, you'll hear them, if you listen to the keynote, reference the Microsoft 365 word, right? So what they've announced at Ignite is a new license called F1 for the suite, right? F1 was available previously for Office 365. Now you can license the entire package, Office 365, Windows 10, EMS, for your frontline workers. That was previously known as kiosk license. So announcement here isn't about feature as much as it is about packaging. Another big takeaway here is this concept of inner and outer loops. Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about what that all means?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier when Daniel and I were talking, I think this is one of the most exciting developments that Microsoft has really realized that throughout them pushing out different applications in the Office 365 suite, there has been a communication gap. And if you look, there are many people out there asking questions, should I use Teams in this context? Should I use Yammer or SharePoint or Groups? How should I think about it? And I think one of the biggest strategic things that came out of Ignite was Microsoft's clarity in talking about them. So they unveiled this language of inner and outer loops. So if you look at the graphic that you see here, Microsoft has basically said, when we think about collaboration inside of 365, you should think about your inner loop and your outer loop. And your inner loop are all those localized team members that you're working on a day-to-day context. And for that, Microsoft wants to say Microsoft Teams is your go-to tool to use in that specific context. But when the times you need to expand beyond your inner loop, your team, and you want to engage people outside of your specific team, then you use the outer loop. And Yammer, and we're going to talk about in a second, has received significant updates, is meant to serve that purpose. So for your wider knowledge management and communication initiatives, Yammer fits that purpose above Teams. So, and you'll notice beneath that, Office 365 Groups is the underpinning to all of that. So I think this is the first time that I felt clarity from Microsoft on how these teams should be used in what specific context.
Excellent. Yes. So seeing clarity is always a good thing. I think that it's interesting to see that Yammer seems to be making a comeback here. Well, at least now we have clarity about where to start a conversation, right? So Teams internally, Yammer on the outside of the organization, Outlook from a more targeted communication, and obviously the Office group is the layer foundational behind that. Great stuff. Okay, so let's jump into Microsoft Teams. So, you know, if some of you on the call have not heard about Microsoft Teams, let's talk what Microsoft Teams is all about. It is an enterprise chat application that was released earlier this year that is part of the Office 365 suite that allows organization and people on a team to collaborate, to share conversation files and other type of content, and to do that in a very effective fashion, right? So, you know, if you use other solutions such as Slack or HipChat, Teams is the equivalent in the Office 365 platform. So what did Microsoft announce? As a matter of fact, this was news for a lot of people. Frankly, it was leaked about a month ago. Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business will converge, is converging into one single product, right? So what Microsoft recognized is, you know, you could chat on Teams one-on-one or one-to-many. You could have meetings and video chatting. There was a lot of overlap with Skype for Business, and why having two applications, right? So there will be a convergence of those two products into one. Microsoft Teams also got guest access earlier in September. It is becoming the tool for intelligent communication to hold meetings, to collaborate on files, documents, and other type of web-based content. It is evolving to become the primary client on Office 365 and will replace Skype for Business over time. It's not immediate. You can still use both. Microsoft has added more interoperability between Skype for Business and Teams, but over time, you're going to see the Skype for Business brand and client disappear. And Microsoft Teams is truly becoming the hub for meetings, right? So things such as automatic meeting transcription, right? So technology that is being deployed now in Teams will allow to transcribe word by word in English or different language what happened during a meeting, so you can have both a physical recording but also a transcript of a meeting if you elect to do so. Very cool stuff. They've actually demonstrated that in one of the sessions. Microsoft Teams is getting calling features such as audio conferencing. It's starting to be available in preview today or last week. It's actually enabling participants to join a team meeting by just dialing a telephone number, things that we have had in Skype for Business for a number of years. Obviously, I've talked about this connection between Teams and Skype for Business, including universal presence and messaging and calling interoperability. And that's available in the very, very near future here. The last thing I want to talk about here is, you know, a feature that is coming is this support for outbound and inbound PSTN calling capability. What that means by that is the ability to make calls the same way that calls were made in the past with Skype for Business. That will become available in the near future here as well. All right, so Chris, take us a little bit around Yammer and this comeback that we've seen around Yammer that was announced at Ignite.
Yeah, so Yammer was always a bit of a question mark, especially for the last couple of years. And as Daniel mentioned, Microsoft Teams has become the most exciting addition to the Office 365 suite in the last couple of years. But it always left the question, where does Yammer fit in? Because Yammer was such a strategic acquisition throughout it. So Daniel, your Skype for Business window is over the presentation. Thank you. So Yammer has received some significant attention. And when I sat in the Yammer roadmap session, I left at the end of it very encouraged to see the investments that are going on to Yammer now and into the future. And as we mentioned, those outer loop language we saw earlier, it really is Microsoft's intended solution that when you need to communicate across the organization, Yammer is the tool to use and to accomplish those objectives. So there were significant technical announcements that were mentioned. One of the most important, I think, is a unified profile with Delve. If you're not familiar with the user profile, how it works in 365, your user profile is actually stored and edited inside of Delve. But for a long time, Yammer had an existing profile that was outside of that, and they're going to announce a unified profile for search and findability and the use inside of Yammer. That's a great addition. There's all kinds of improvements on posting. You can see rich text formatting in my screenshot on the right, all kinds of autocomplete functionality, just a lot of exciting things that bring Yammer into the modern experience. I mean, if you even think about a tool that we're familiar with using like Facebook or Twitter, these are things not even found inside of those tools. There's also new analytics available to administrators on how they use Yammer, which is a constant ask among many of our clients that we work with. And it's also expanded into e-discovery. So if you're using Office 365 administration to use e-discovery to find or set alerts or find certain bits of information that are shared across Yammer, that is now expanded. There's also much better moderation that's provided. So before, if you started a thread, it lived in that specific Yammer group. You couldn't move it, you couldn't change it, but that has changed. They're now giving you new tools to move across groups. There's also things called highlighted replies. So if you're asking official questions, you can mark an official response as the best response, something akin to like a user voice. So very exciting there to see that the posting and administration experience has improved drastically. And the last is Team Tabs integration. So another thing that was always a question is, how is Yammer going to better integrate to the existing tools? Be it that it is an outer loop tool, as Microsoft has stated, there's still a desire to use these in other areas of Office 365. And then one of the most exciting is this new Yammer web part for SharePoint. If you're not familiar with the old Yammer web part, it essentially just embedded a group view inside of SharePoint, which was slow, it wasn't the best experience. But now they've extended that, and they're actually using the development tools and APIs provided by Yammer to have a native embed. So if you're wanting to bring those Yammer conversations into SharePoint, this is a much better iteration of that. And you'll notice on the right that there is a series of options to choose new conversations. So it's akin to the old Yammer embed that showed the most recent post. But you can also have two other options. You can show top conversations, which are those conversations that are receiving the most activity. And then you can actually choose select conversations to be highlighted. So if you can use now use Yammer in various aspects of your SharePoint. So if you're using it in a more collaboration type of environment, perhaps you want a more new conversation view to show that ongoing thread. If you're using it in SharePoint sites that are meant to be more communication oriented, now you can highlight things like select conversations. So really great story that is being told by Microsoft on how to bring these tools together. I know, Daniel, you're excited about seeing Yammer become a first-party citizen in SharePoint as well.
Yeah, we certainly are. I think there's been a lot of confusion and lack of clarity about when to use Yammer, and I think this outer loop is something we've been pitching to our clients for many years. Yammer is the tool to collaborate into the entire organization from the outer loop perspective, where Microsoft Teams become the work where the place where teams collaborate, right? And now that you can add a Yammer feed into a team channel is giving you one more option to bring it all together as well. Great stuff. Thank you, Chris. So moving on, of course, SharePoint has received a lot of news. Probably the largest share of news at Ignite was around Microsoft SharePoint, both online and on-premise as well. So let's get going here. We're having some technical difficulty with advancing slides today. All right, so the biggest announcement was around the SharePoint hub site. Chris, why don't you tell us and take us a little bit through this concept of hub sites, what they are. We have a few slides around this. But what's a hub site? So
this is the single most exciting announcement that came in the SharePoint keynote at Ignite, led by CVP Jeff Teeper. There were lots of announcements, as Daniel mentioned, but we feel like this is a specific one. If you're familiar with Microsoft in the last year and a half, has put out what they're calling modern SharePoint experiences. So now these are responsive out of the box. They have a whole new look and feel to them. And it's supposed to be the next generation of what SharePoint is going to be, both online and eventually down to on-premises deployments. But there have been questions about how do these modern sites relate to each other. If you're familiar with the existing model in SharePoint, we would create a SharePoint site collection and then have subsites beneath them, and that's how we generally built a information hierarchy within inside of SharePoint. But Microsoft has only allowed these modern sites to exist in their own site collections, and that's brought several challenges such as news aggregation, theming, and navigation as well. And the hub sites is the opportunity for us to bring together modern sites in one single experience. So if we go forward a slide, you'll see a graphic on how these different modern sites are meant to be brought together inside of a single hub. Now, Microsoft talked extensively that it's not as though you're confined to one specific hub. So if, for example, you wanted to have common theming, navigation, and news aggregation across maybe an organizational departmental type of structure, and then another one for different business units, you can create these separate hub sites and bring those together. And you can see in the slide that both team sites and communication sites can be part of this hub. And immediately when they make that association, they inherit that global navigation, those theming options. And another exciting thing is that now when you make a search query, it looks across all those different hub or sites that are part of that particular hub. So as far as hub sites, this is really the final missing piece that is necessary to bring these modern sites together as they continue to evolve. And we think it's an exciting development. The only thing to keep in mind in your deployments is that Microsoft has only said at this point that they're going to be released in first release in the first half of next year. So we're probably realistically looking to something around spring, summer next year for them to be in general availability. But when you're thinking about your SharePoint projects, hub sites are a great enabler to use with the modern sites.
Right. So communication site, Chris, was the first, new capability that was launched this year to give a new modern experience to a publishing site or a more communication-oriented site. The question was, well, how do we bring it all together? Let's say we have 10 communication sites for each department. So the hub site is that answer, right? The hub site is what brings and aggregate those team site, communication site, groups, and MS Teams together into one consistent user interface. It certainly is the building block for an intranet, right? It's where you will build a corporate intranet or a division intranet, right? But it's not a ready-to-go complete solution yet, right, Chris? I mean, it still requires a lot of assembly.
Yes, and that's another thing to keep in mind is that even though Microsoft team, thinking about Office 365, wants to push more and more of these as out-of-the-box, ready-to-go tools, it's important to remember that there is still a significant amount of thought that needs to go into how you structure hubs and the associated hub sites. So our common disciplines that we've used, like information architecture, UX design, all of those have not been made moot by the addition of SharePoint hub sites. If anything, there's a greater need for expertise to think about how to bring those different pieces together.
Definitely, and I think that's appropriate. We have a question from the audience around, are those hub sites its own site collection? I think what we're starting to learn with Microsoft around sites in SharePoint Online is the concept of site collection isn't as critical as it used to be, right? Every modern site is a site collection. The way you put them together is through those hub sites, right? So the hub sites will be the place that essentially create a hierarchy of sites among SharePoint Online, right? We don't have the exact answer to that. As a matter of fact, we'll respond offline to those questions too, but that's how we're seeing it right now.
That's correct. Yes. So the hub site, as well as all the associated modern sites, they are their own site collections. There's still some questions to be answered, but that seems to be Microsoft's road going forward, is to have these as individual site collections.
Excellent. Okay, so there was more announcements around SharePoint, right, Chris?
Yeah, that's just the beginning. Hub sites is just the most notable one. So that we have announced a new version of on-premises deployment, and Jeff Teeper was very clear in the discussion that he had on SharePoint on-premises that they are committed to it ongoing. There are questions how Microsoft would think about on-premises SharePoint. They are committed to it. But Jeff made a very specific point that I think is important that all of you know, that not only will the features that are announced come first to Office 365, but there will be several pieces that will never be available in the on-premises deployment. So it's important to remember that when you're making that cost-benefit analysis on whether to go on-prem or in the cloud, that all these announcements that we're getting will come vastly sooner to the Office 365 deployments. There are a couple other exciting things, like we mentioned earlier, the Yammer web part, which much better integration. There are a slew of new modern web parts, which are really great because right now they're only about 12 to 15. They're going to announce a lot more, including connectors to third-party data, so you can bring that in and you don't need to go through a lot of programmatic work to do that. Another exciting, for those of you who are using very large lists, meaning over the 5,000 limit threshold, There are significant improvements to performance for them and how you moderate large lists, so that's very exciting. And then what you see on the right is a newly announced search experience that will be a first-party citizen in Office 365 powered by Graph. And that's another thing that you'll see, we'll talk a little bit later on, is that Microsoft Graph and that machine learning is going to be a significant part of all future SharePoint developments going forward.
So, Chris, a question on the improvement to performance for large lists. Does that mean that Microsoft is virtually removing the limits of how many items you can have in a document library on a list, right? So that's kind of going away ultimately, right?
So yes, I went to the session on them, and he basically said there are still some numbers in there around 1 million, where they talked about soft limits, but they've improved it to where you can now have auto paging in a list. You don't have to worry about view thresholds. So he basically said, for all intents and purposes, we are essentially unveiling unlimited SharePoint list maximums. Now, one thing to keep in mind from the session is he talked extensively about indices in SharePoint. So if you're working with SharePoint lists that are very large, in the north of the 5,000 plus range, they still need planning. And he talked about automatic performance indices where SharePoint will create them and allow your list to perform in a very performant way. So there's still planning that goes involved in, but if you're using large lists, this is a great announcement for your productivity.
Excellent. Well, from my perspective, I would say it's about time, right? I mean, that limit has been there for way too long. So we're excited to see that coming. All right, so there were additional SharePoint announcements. A lot of our administration experience. We have a screenshot here of a new SharePoint Administrative Center that will get rolled out over the next couple months. Give you a lot of reporting, better access to all the site collection, the sites and management. One surprise here is Microsoft is releasing a new migration tool. It's a simple migration tool, but for those of you that want to migrate content to SharePoint Online, we now have a new option from Microsoft that's a visual tool to do simple migration. Let's not get too excited. Simple migration it is. Microsoft also announced a lot of enhanced integration with Power Apps and Flow. This is really a follow-up of what was announced earlier this year at the SharePoint Symposium. We showed demonstration earlier in May, and now we saw real advances in capability that are coming. We have a few slides about that coming. The most exciting one from my perspective is one that I've personally been asking for at least 4 or 5 years, which is a multi-geographical dispersed SharePoint deployment, right? So think about if you are a global or international organization with offices around the world, when you move to Office 365, you had to make a difficult decision. Where do I put my tenant? And when you selected your tenant, you were stuck with the location, right? So that meant that, folks in the UK, for instance, and if you have a tenant in the US, had to go, across the world to get the data. With this multi-geographic capability, you will now be able to move SharePoint across the world in different geographies. So that's very welcome. So here's a quick screenshot about this SharePoint migration tool. Again, simple tool to select the source. That can be on-premise SharePoint, on-premise file share, and move this into a SharePoint or OneDrive, right? So it's a visual tool to do basic migration capability. That's coming in and being available in the next week or two. So very imminent release. Power Apps is continuing to get traction and excitement within Microsoft. What's been released now is about to be released, the ability to use Power Apps to customize SharePoint list. In this screenshot, we're showing you a SharePoint list with a customized UI, and that was built using Power Apps. So truly bringing the no-code, easy to use user interface to make SharePoint lists look like application virtually, right? So this is an example of an event list where people can sign up to volunteer, all built into a SharePoint online list. We also saw the visualization of what Microsoft Flow is or will become where it's now integrated with document libraries, both on OneDrive and SharePoint, where essentially you can take documents and if you have a flow that send it for review, which if you guys don't know what Microsoft Flow is, it's the next generation workflow engine that's part of SharePoint and Office 365. So the flow is now integrated into document libraries, and that was announced. Again, back to my favorite new capability here. Again, if you are not a multinational organization, that may not be important to you. Although a US-based organization may see benefit, the idea here is a better increase in performance, right? So you'll be able to have an Office 365 tenant spanning multiple geography, focusing on SharePoint and OneDrive. As you may know, Exchange was already capable of doing that, but SharePoint and OneDrive was not. So it will operate as one tenant, with SharePoint side being dispersed across the world. So why is that important? Right? For many organizations, the data has to reside in specific region of the world for compliance reason, right? So you couldn't do that in the past. With this multi-geo SharePoint side, you'll be able to get your data closer to where they're supposed to be, improvement in performance, and with all of that, having specific capability rolled down into one, such as e-discovery and things like that, right? It is available now, already available in most regions in the world. The French region is coming soon, but that's things that are coming in the very near future. All right, so let's talk about, Chris, tell us what's coming in the world of OneDrive and SharePoint document libraries.
Yeah, OneDrive got its own specific announcements, but what's important to remember, as the title of the slide indicates, is that when we talk about OneDrive, more than ever, we're also talking the corollary to SharePoint document libraries. For those that don't know, the modern experience when we talk about was originally unveiled in the context of OneDrive alone and then extended into the SharePoint sites that we talk about today. So it's important to remember that as we talk about these, they extend to both. But there are a lot of exciting things that come to this experience. I don't even know how many times in different sessions the SharePoint team and OneDrive teams talked about these file preview handlers. What that basically means is they've added almost 300 file preview handlers. So they gave demonstrations on Adobe Illustrator files and 3D models that you can actually open up and interact with inside of the browser. I'm not even sure technically how they pulled it off, but it's very impressive. So if you're working on a team, let's say like we do with graphic designers who are sharing Adobe Creative Cloud files, those are now surfaced. You can view them and not have to have those applications. The screenshot you can see there on the right, there's a whole new sharing experience that is much more streamlined. It was in the previous incarnations of OneDrive and SharePoint libraries, it was confusing, wasn't quite sure what you were accomplishing in those dialogues, and they've streamlined that significantly. They're also, one of the exciting things, if you have in your OneDrive or SharePoint libraries lots and lots of files and you don't need all of them, you can now get what's called on demand. So you can go and it'll show icons, it'll show you all the files that are in your OneDrive or SharePoint library, and you can actually choose on a file or folder basis which you want to download for your local copy. That's a very exciting announcement too. And then as Daniel mentioned, multi-geo support not only extends to SharePoint, but OneDrive as well. And another exciting announcement with multi-geo is that in the new SharePoint administration interface, it will actually provide you analytics based on your different multi-geo configurations. So OneDrive got significant love as well as SharePoint, and it's exciting to see the convergence of the experience between OneDrive and SharePoint document libraries.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. So here's a topic that really was a surprise for a lot of people. It's called Bing for Business. I don't think we saw that coming. We weren't aware of this this project was actually being released. So what is Bing for Business? If you saw the keynote or the second keynote, there was a great demonstration on this. It's a new intelligent search experience for Office 365 and Windows 10 with built-in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and content personalization. So what essentially Bing for Business does is it federates search capability from outside the firewall with inside and merge it together so that when you go in Bing and search for, something, a term, a keyword, the system will go out and look at first internally, can I get you that answer from internal capability based on some of the results that we have here on the screen, people search, organizations chart, floor plans, document search, groups, industry, other type of content, and present that to you in one UI. So here's a screenshot. This is coming in preview in the next few weeks, but I'm on Bing here. I'm actually logged in, right? So it's Bing for Business. I'm searching for someone named Thomas, and first the system will go out, of course, on the web and search everything, but more importantly, we'll first say we find someone in your organization called Thomas, right? And here's his people card, right? So you see very rich information. Now that information is only available to you because you're logged into Bing for Business with your Office 365 account, and therefore you have federated search results, right? But from a UI standpoint, it shows everything to one screen. So that's exciting things to see, to really merge and allow people to not have to worry about searching in 2 different or 3 different places. Everything will come into one place. As a matter of fact, Microsoft also announced a lot of our new enterprise search capability, the ability to populate the Office graph and the search indices online with data from other systems. So we're now seeing the lights of a true enterprise search strategy coming out of our folks at Microsoft. The last thing that we wanted to talk about here, and we'll give you a quick interactive demonstration here. If you attended Ignite or listened to any of the keynote, you heard that AI, which stands for artificial intelligence, was everywhere. I think there wasn't a keynote where AI was not mentioned to a certain degree. So where's AI coming to play? If you use Office Graph or Dell, you probably don't know there's a lot of AI behind the scenes. Machine learning, the system learning from your query and your search and your habits and your connection with people to learn and provide better personalized content. Microsoft Teams have a lot of intelligent bots, one coming around people search and people discovery and experience discovery. Those are bots or robots integrated in Microsoft Teams that talks to you, or conversational bots with a lot of AI intelligence. Microsoft gave some demo about an integration of LinkedIn into the people card with built-in AI and machine learning, so that now the LinkedIn data will help you find better content internally. Microsoft announced a new machine learning tool called the Machine Learning Workbench to build ML machine learning capability. And last, they demonstrated Excel and PowerPoint AI capability. And I really wanted to finish this webinar here, and then we'll open up for questions around showing you some those capability inside PowerPoint. All right, so let me switch here, and I'm going to take a slide deck here, and obviously I'm not a great designer here, so I always need help to make my deck look pretty, and Jenny spent a lot of time here helping me make my deck look nicer. Now I can get the help of a machine here. So here's a deck. I have a slide with some bullets, and I've got a slide with bullet and some images here. It looks very boring here. So if you go now to the design function, click on design idea, what you see here is a machine learning, artificial intelligence engine taking your content on that slide and suggested based on the content, and I insist here, it's not just slam templates, it's based on your content, showing you different type of way to format a slide, right? That's true artificial intelligence coming to help an individual user do a better, quick job. I guess interesting when I take this slide here and look at my images, now I can come here and make this look very nice in a few clicks, right? Of course, you can always take this on and edit the slide and make it better and change the font and help. But this is an example of artificial intelligence here bringing to the power of the individual user to help someone be faster, more productive, and coming up with design ideas. As a matter of fact, you've seen here that the system constantly go out and try to come up with new design ideas. As you add content to the slide, the system will come out and get you more information. This is what Microsoft called the Office Intelligence Services. You've seen that in Design Idea, you've seen that in spelling, and you'll see more of those power into your PowerPoint or Office application here. Very exciting stuff here that is coming to a desktop, and you'll see if you're on Office 365 Pro Plus, you'll see that in the next few weeks being released on your desktop clients. All right, so let's wrap it up, Chris. So I think you spent the entire week here. So what were your impressions? What's your key takeaways here?
Yeah, as we talked about, and all the different innovation that's coming out, is that Microsoft is really moving forward at an accelerated pace that I don't think I have seen, certainly in my 10 years. Daniel's been working with Microsoft longer than I have, but a series of announcements this wide sweeping in this short of a time. So it's exciting, but it's also overwhelming to want to think about going into something like Office or Microsoft 365. But I think because of that, because of these innovations, I think the time is more clear than ever today to think strategically about moving into something like Office 365. Because unlike the SharePoint or different tools of the past that existed on-premise, they would have to go through very expensive upgrade cycles to receive new features and innovation. And almost on a daily and weekly basis, Microsoft is pushing out new innovations that can drastically change the way that you work. And the most important thing, I think, is to have a partner to help think through how to understand and strategically implement these different changes. And I know, Daniel, you've been doing this longer than I have, but one of the best things that Withum brings to understanding these changes is how to help you navigate and use all these different innovations effectively to maximize your investment in the platform.
Great, yeah, and Chris, I think I feel the same way. I think the pace of change is definitely accelerating. You know, it's been clear for many organizations that now is the time to move to this platform. Again, Microsoft Office 365 or Microsoft 365, which is this over-encompassing platform, is where you will receive and gain the more benefits of improvement and new capability, right? So that's coming, and the time is clearer than ever that we should be moving, and you should be moving to this. I think, you know, the complexity, the amount of choices, the strategy is something we can help with, right? I think that with them as years of experience helping clients and customers and, you know, in this area, and obviously we'll be extremely happy to help any of you in the audience today to certainly have a part of shaping your journey to moving to Office 365. Mm-hmm. So Jenny, do we have any questions on the audience here?
We do. It's regarding how Teams is going to be merging with Skype for Business, and they're just wondering, like, when will we expect to see this change?
All right. So good question. Great question. When is Teams and Skype for Business merging? It's not immediate. I don't think that we have clarity on exact timeline. But what we're going to see and what we're seeing is a convergence over time, right? So Microsoft Teams will get more and more feature added. Audio conferencing for meetings is coming anytime. Call inbound and outbound is calling next. Voicemail and all the other Skype for Business feature will be added to Microsoft Teams. When that happens, you'll be able to switch away from using Skype for Business and use Teams exclusively. What we don't know is what will happen with folks that only want to have chatting, right? That you're going to need to have the full team client to do just chat one-on-one. Will there be a Microsoft Teams Lite client? We're not sure about all of this, but this is happening over the next probably 3 to 4 months. Microsoft is probably going to support both for a while, obviously. They'll give us time to make the transition, but that's coming over the next 3 to 4 months.
Good. And then someone's asking, what was your favorite track announcement at Ignite? Like, what should they really be paying attention to?
I think the keynote, definitely. The first keynote on Monday morning in the subsequent keynote that day give us a great insight about what Microsoft is thinking. If you think about the first demonstration that was performed on Monday, it was around Microsoft Teams, right? That tells us a lot about where Microsoft is thinking from a strategic investment standpoint. Team is a key pillar of the strategic vision around Office 365. As a matter of fact, this first demonstration was Teams with augmented reality. Very exciting things of using augmented reality or virtual reality inside Teams and sharing that with the rest of the organization was one of the demo that was performed that Monday morning. So I think, start with this first few keynotes and then move on. You can look at this session one by one, search from what you're interested in. More importantly, I think we want to gauge our audience here about, what our next webinar should be. What should we focus on? So let us launch the webinar, the poll here. All right, so we're engaging our audience here. Lots of interest about Microsoft Teams, and SharePoint and OneDrive, right? So great interest here. We'll focus on both of those. Obviously, this is what the audience is looking at. Thanks for providing us your input here. Okay, so a few more questions here. The next question is about, Jenny, what's the next question about?
The next question is talking about on-premises and 365. So is there any major feature difference going forward between SharePoint on-premises and Microsoft 365?
That's a great question. I think we hear that quite a bit, and I'll take a first response here, and then Chris, feel free to add on. Yes, there are a lot of feature difference. I think let's start first talking about where we are. SharePoint on-premise is SharePoint 2016. There's been 2 release pack since then. The latest release pack was released 2 months ago, which included this new SharePoint framework on-premise. So yes, there are a lot of feature differences. The first one is online is being updated on a monthly basis, on-premise maybe twice a year. So user experience, such as communication sites only exist online, the hub sites will only be released online, the Office Graph, Teams require online, SharePoint online. Now the core, document library list experience is pretty much in par. So Chris, do you want to add something about the differences between on-premise and online?
Yeah, I think the one thing to note is that right now, in the Feature Pack 2 that Daniel mentioned, which is their new deployment model to move innovations from Office 365 to SharePoint on-premise, they run somewhere between a year and a half behind their release in Office 365. So again, if innovation and acceleration are important to your organization, that's the way to go is to think about 365. But your other option, which Withum has done extensive amounts of work with, are hybrid deployments. So if you want to bring in the functionality of something like Delve and federated search, you can do that through a hybrid deployment. And we have helped many clients work through the complexities of something like that.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, think about SharePoint on-premise as stuck at a point of time. Is SharePoint Online stopped at a point in time? And as Chris said, about a year behind, right? So you'll get the on-premise a year behind online, but you won't get all the features moved to on-premise. Jenny, any more questions here?
No, I think another one would be how to, actually here it starts with, is there any correlation between HubSite and Microsoft Teams?
Great question. So is there a connection between Microsoft Teams and HubSite? The short answer is yes. Remember that a Microsoft team, when you create one, creates an Office group, which creates a SharePoint site, modern team site behind the scenes. So would you be able to connect the dots? Absolutely. You'll be from a hub site to find a team, that's a Microsoft Teams site that's connected to a team and get to the team to see the conversation and other things, right? That's a different user interface, and Microsoft is working on merging or embedding the SharePoint site experience into Team and vice versa as well. So short answer is it will come. There is correlation now, and every Teams will be part of a hub if you elect to do so.
Okay, it looks, I mean, a lot of the questions were similar coming in. It looks like we've been able to cover pretty much all of them. Is there anything that you guys would like to add? I think that since there were so many announcements and it's a lot to digest, where should people get started? I mean, like, there's people who have Office 365 and there's people who don't have Office 365.
So if you have Office 365, obviously, what we've been helping organizations to figure is what's my path, what's my strategy, right? What should I use? What should I use of the features that exist today? What should we use of the features that are coming tomorrow? And how do we define a proper strategy to rolling this out? So that's obviously something that we're excited to help. As a matter of fact, we're happy to have a couple hours consultation with everyone on this webinar today to talk about your specific. So putting a strategy together is something that's critical.
Because these features are sitting on in their Office 365. They have access to them. So if they're not taking advantage of them, they're paying for them, but they're not getting the benefits of utilizing them.
If you are not on Office 365, obviously contact us and we'll help you make the business case. I like to take a real-life example of an organization we met with in Florida a few weeks ago, which suffered, a downtime because of hurricanes, right? And if you are on-premise, hosted in a data center, and you are in a zone prone to power outage, you may lose, power, and you may lose access to your data. So I think that now is the time to think about your plan B and how can I ensure business continuity. And Office 365, and as a larger degree, Microsoft 365 is the platform to get you there.
Great, excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you very much. Chris, do you want to say one last thing before we close this webinar out?
Yeah, the last thing that I would say is we talked through a lot of technology announcements, and a lot of them are exciting and in some cases overdue. But the most exciting part that I took away from Ignite is clarity on where all these applications are going and how they're going to move together. And so that's exciting, and we would love to talk with any one of you about how to move your organization into these exciting developments.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Jenny, thank you for setting it up.
Absolutely.
Chris, thanks for your insight on spending a week at Ignite. And thank you, the audience, for coming in. And we'll look forward to joining us back in the next webinar on Teams or SharePoint and OneDrive.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining. Have a great afternoon.